The date is February 1st, 1943. 20,000 feet above the scorching sands of Tunisia, Lieutenant Kendrick Bragg grips the yoke of his B-17 Flying Fortress so hard his knuckles turn white. A German Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighter screams toward him at nearly the speed of sound. Head-on collision course. Bragg rams the nose down, but he's not fast enough. Humph! The impact shakes every rivet in the aluminum skin. The plane shudders, dives. The tail section, 10 tons of metal and hydraulics, dangles from the fuselage by a thread, literally swaying in the 200-mile-per-hour slipstream like a fishtail in water. His tail gunner is trapped back there, unable to crawl forward. The control cables are cut. The oxygen system is dead. The electrical system is fried. And they're still 90 minutes from base, over enemy territory. Every law of physics says this plane cannot fly. But somehow, it does. This is the true story of the B-17 All-American, and the 10 men who refused to die. You've probably seen the photograph. A B-17 Flying Fortress nearly severed in half, its entire tail section hanging on by what looks like a few scraps of metal and a prayer. It's one of the most iconic images of World War II. But the real story, the one that's been buried under decades of exaggeration and myth, is even more incredible than the legend. February 1st, 1943. The Allies are pushing the Germans and Italians out of North Africa. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, is making his last stand. His supply lines run through the ports of Tunis and Bizerte in Tunisia. Cut those ports and you cut his army off at the knees. That's where the 97th Bomb Group comes in. Flying out of a dusty airfield in Biskra, Algeria, 12 B-17 Flying Fortresses are tasked with bombing the German-held docks at Tunis, almost 300 miles northwest, deep into enemy territory. Leading the formation, a B-17 called Flaming Mame, piloted by Major Robert Coulter, commanding officer of the 341st Bomb Squadron. Flying behind and to the right, tucked into the formation for mutual protection, B-17F serial number 41-24406. Her crew called her All-American, and in less than 2 hours, she would become a legend. Lieutenant Kendrick R. Bragg Jr. wasn't supposed to be a pilot. Born in Savannah, Georgia in 1918, Ken Bragg grew up with dirt on his hands and football in his blood. He played for Duke University during the 1938 season, the year the team earned the nickname the Blue Devils. Tough, scrappy, relentless. That was Bragg. When war broke out in Europe, he could have stayed home, finished his degree, lived a quiet life. But Bragg wasn't built for quiet. He volunteered for the Army Air Corps. By the summer of 1942, he'd earned his wings and his commission. Fresh-faced, 24 years old. Assigned to the 414th Bomb Squadron, 97th Bomb Group, the first American unit to fly daylight bombing missions into Nazi-occupied Europe. They handed him a brand new B-17F Flying Fortress, serial number 41-24406, built in Seattle, ferried across the Atlantic via Maine, Newfoundland, and Scotland. She arrived at RAF Polebrook, England, on August 24, 1942. Bragg and his crew came from all over the country, north and south. Farm boys and city kids. They decided to name the plane All-American, because that's what they were. The crew of the All-American. Ken Bragg, pilot. The calm one, the leader. Godfrey Engel Jr., co-pilot, steady hands. Ralph Burbridge, bombardier, sharp eyes. Harry Newsell, navigator, could find home in the dark. Joe James, flight engineer and top turret gunner, kept the engines singing. Paul Galloway, radio operator, their lifeline to base. Michael Zook, waist gunner, defensive fire. Elton Conda, ball turret gunner, borrowed from another crew that day. Sam Sarpoulos, tail gunner, the loneliest position on a B-17. And on the ground, Hank Highland, crew chief, the man who kept all-American flying. They flew their first combat mission on August 17, 1942. The very first American daylight bombing raid over Nazi-occupied Europe. Target, railway yards near Rouen, France. They survived. By November, the 97th Bomb Group was transferred to North Africa to support Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of Algeria and Morocco. They traded the green fields of England for dusty tents in the Sahara Desert. German air raids, scorching heat, sand in everything. But they kept flying. By Christmas 1942, they were based at Biskra, Algeria, a desert airfield within striking distance of Rommel's last strongholds. On February 1, 1943, they received their orders. Target, Tunis. Mission, destroy the docks, cripple the supply chain. Nobody knew it yet, but some of them would never come home. Chapter 1. The briefing. The pre-mission briefing was routine. 12 B-17s. Rendezvous with the 301st Bomb Group. P-38 Lightning fighters for escort. Approach Tunis from the southwest. Drop bombs from 20,000 feet. Return to Biskra. Simple. Except nothing in war is ever simple. Major Robert Coulter climbed into the lead plane, Flaming Mame, with his regular pilot, Lieutenant Jesse Wickel, riding as co-pilot. Behind him, Bragg and his crew settled into All-American. Engines roared to life. 4 Wright Cyclone radials per plane, each one generating 1,200 horsepower. They lifted off into the North African sky. The formation climbed to altitude. Cold, thin air. The crews switched to oxygen masks. But something went wrong. The 301st Bomb Group, the unit they were supposed to rendezvous with, kept diverting off course. Inside Flaming Mame, navigator Lieutenant Ralph Burke advised Major Coulter to maintain a direct heading for Tunis. Approach from the west instead. Coulter acknowledged. The 97th Bomb Group broke away. No rendezvous. No P-38 escort. They were on their own. Chapter 2. Into the Fire. German radar picked them up. Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters from Jagdgeschwader 53, the Luftwaffe's elite, scrambled from airfields near Tunis. Their mission: stop the bombers at all costs. The B-17s held formation, tight, overlapping fields of fire from 13.50 caliber machine guns per plane. Flying fortress indeed. The 109s came in fast, hit-and-run attacks, diving through the formation, cannons blazing. The air filled with tracer fire, red streaks crisscrossing the sky like deadly fireworks. Inside All-American, the gunners opened fire. Ralph Burbridge and Harry Newsell manned the nose guns. Joe James swung the top turret. Michael Zook fired from the waist. Sam Sarpoulos in the tail. The noise was deafening. Then the German anti-aircraft guns joined in. Flak bursts, black clouds of shrapnel exploding at 20,000 feet. The B-17s flew through it like ships through a storm, but they held formation. They reached the target. Bomb bay doors opened. Ralph Burbridge lined up the Norden bomb site. Bombs away!
12 B-17s released their payload. Explosions rippled across the docks below. Mission accomplished. Now they just had to get home. Chapter 3. The Aces. As the formation turned for Biskra, 2 German pilots climbed to intercept them. Oberleutnant Julius Meinberg, 31 kills, an ace, veteran of the Battle of Britain. Feldwebel Erich Patzia, 16 kills, young, aggressive, fearless. Both flying Messerschmitt Bf-109 G4S. Meinberg later described the moment in his memoirs. I first came across a departing formation of around 12 Boeings in a very tight formation without fighter protection. This was the opportunity to once again launch a frontal attack. Frontal attack, the most dangerous maneuver for both sides. The B-17's weakest point was the nose, only 2 machine guns. But attacking from the front meant flying straight into the guns of 12 bombers, a wall of lead. Meinberg and Patzia accelerated, overtook the formation just out of gun range, then turned. Head-on collision course. Speed nearly 500 miles per hour combined. Meinberg lined up on flaming MAME, his gun sight centered on the cockpit. His finger squeezed the trigger. A burst of fire from all weapons eats into the enemy's torso. A red-hot explosion. A short pull on the control stick, and I'm above the formation. But the B-17s fired back. Meinberg's oxygen tank exploded. Fire, hissing flames in the cockpit. He bailed out. Severe burns. He survived, but his war was over for months. Erich Patzia wasn't so lucky. He lined up on All-American. Patzia's machine guns and 20mm cannons blazed. Inside All-American, the crew heard the impacts. Metal tearing, hydraulic lines severing, sparks flying. Bragg saw the 109 coming, straight at him, inches from the cockpit glass. He ran the yoke forward. The B-17's nose dipped, almost fast enough. The Messerschmitt screamed overhead. Its wing, a 6-foot blade of aluminum traveling at 300 miles per hour, sliced diagonally through All-American's tail section like a guillotine. Whoomp! The impact threw everyone forward. The plane shuddered. Dove. Bragg's first thought, we're dead. The German fighter tumbled past, out of control. Patzia, killed instantly or incapacitated by defensive fire, never pulled out. His plane spiraled into the desert below. But inside All-American, the nightmare was just beginning. The left horizontal stabilizer gone, completely torn away. The tail section hanging by a thread, swaying in the slipstream. A gaping hole 16 feet long and 4 feet wide, where the fuselage used to be solid. Control cables severed. Only one elevator cable remained intact. Oxygen system dead. Electrical system fried. Intercom destroyed. And in the tail turret, completely cut off from the rest of the crew, Staff Sergeant Sam Sarpolis clung to his guns as the entire rear section of the plane swayed like the tail of a kite. He had no parachute within reach, no way to crawl forward. The floor between him and the waist gunners was gone. He was trapped. Bragg and Engel fought the controls, hands and knees on the yoke,
throttling back the engines to prevent the plane from pitching up and tearing itself apart. Every crew member grabbed their parachutes. Ralph Burbridge thought, boy, this is it. But slowly, impossibly, the plane leveled out. Bragg rose from his seat, climbed to the top turret, looked back. What he saw defied belief. The tail was hanging on by maybe 10% of the original structure. A few metal spars, some skin. That's it. And somehow, it was still attached. Bragg made his way to the radio room. The intercom was dead, so he had to shout over the roar of wind screaming through the 16-foot hole in the fuselage. He gathered the crew. "We're 90 minutes from Biskra," he said. "Anyone who wants to bail out, you're free to go. No questions." The crew looked at each other. They were still over German lines. Parachuting down meant capture, or worse. And Sam Sarpalus was still trapped in the tail. One by one, they shook their heads. "We're staying." Bragg nodded. "Then let's get her home." The crew went to work. Michael Zook and the other waist gunner, standing with their heads sticking out through the hole in the fuselage, kept watch for German fighters. If the Luftwaffe saw a crippled B-17 limping home alone, they'd pounce. Joe James monitored the engines. All four were still running, a miracle in itself. Harry Newsell plotted the course home. No GPS, no nav computer, just a map, a compass, and his brain. And in the cockpit, Bragg and Engel held the yoke with white-knuckled grips. Every control input had to be gentle. Too much movement, and the tail would rip clean off. They couldn't use the autopilot. The cables were cut. But the Norden bomb sight, designed to keep the plane level during bombing runs, still worked. They used it to help stabilize the aircraft. A bombing computer, keeping them alive. Meanwhile, in the swaying tail section, Sam Sarpalus made a decision. He had to crawl forward. No floor, just open air. The tail swinging in the slipstream. He grabbed his parachute, 4 gun brushes, a jacket Bragg had lent him earlier, and he started crawling, hand over hand, through the wreckage, over twisted metal, with 20,000 feet of empty air below him. When he finally reached the waist section, Bragg was there. Sarpalus, sheepish grin on his face, held up the jacket, motioned with his chin. "You forgot this, skipper." Bragg just stared at him. Then he laughed. Because what else could you do? The rest of the 97th Bomb Group formation slowed down, flew alongside All-American, a protective escort. If German fighters attacked, they'd have to go through the whole formation. Inside one of the other B-17s, flying flit gun, Navigator Lieutenant Charles Cutforth raised his camera. He took the photo that would make history. For 90 agonizing minutes, Bragg and Engel flew All-American across the Tunisian desert. Every second felt like an hour. The plane vibrated, groaned. The tail swayed, but it held together. Finally, Biskra. The airfield appeared on the horizon. Bragg fired 3 red flares. Emergency landing. Could a plane with no tail actually land? Bragg lowered the landing gear, tested the flaps. The plane responded, but the tail wheel was inoperative. The tail section would have to drag across the runway. "Last chance," Bragg said over the intercom. "Anyone wants to bail out, now's the time." Again, the crew refused. Bragg lined up for a long, slow approach. Engines throttled back, airspeed dropping. The plane descended like a feather. The main gear touched down, then the tail. It scraped, screeched, dragged across the sandy runway. But it held. The plane rolled to a stop. Bragg shut down the engines. Silence. The ambulance crews rushed forward. Bragg calmly reported, "No business, Doc." Not a single injury. 10 men stepped out of a plane that should have been a smear on the desert floor. The crews gathered around All-American in stunned silence. Pieces of the German fighter's wing were still embedded in the tail section. The fuselage was sliced nearly in 2. You could drive a jeep through the hole. 3 men from another crew climbed inside to inspect the damage. One of them turned to Sam Sarpalus. "Say, why didn't she break in 2?" Sarpalus started to answer. And that's when the tail broke off. Right there on the ground, under the weight of 3 men. It had held together for 90 minutes in the air. Through turbulence, through turns, through landing. And now, safe on the ground, it finally gave up. Elton Conda, the ball turret gunner who'd been borrowed from another squadron, walked up to Bragg. No words, just a long, firm handshake. That said everything. But not everyone made it home. Flaming Mame, the lead aircraft, never returned. 7 of the 10 men aboard were killed, including Major Robert Coulter. 3 survived as prisoners of war: Bombardier Alfred Blair, Navigator Ralph Burke, and tail gunner Robert Knight. After the war, they testified that Flaming Mame had been struck by a German fighter in a collision. The same collision that hit All American. The truth remains murky, lost in the fog of war. But one thing is certain. That day, 2 B-17s were hit. One fell from the sky. The other defied every law of physics to make it home. The photo of All American became front-page news across America. It inspired the 414th Bomb Squadron's new squadron patch, still in use today by the 414th Expeditionary Reconnaissance Squadron. It helped inspire the hit song "Comin' In on a Wing and a Prayer," and it became a symbol of American ingenuity, toughness, and sheer refusal to quit. But here's the part most people don't know. All American flew again. The 50th Air Service Squadron, working in the scorching desert sun, spent 6 weeks replacing the tail section. They salvaged parts from another wrecked B-17, bolted it on, re-riveted the fuselage. By March 1943, All American was airworthy. She was reassigned to the 301st Bomb Group. But the repairs, done in a field with limited tools, left her slower than before, plagued with problems. After one more combat mission, she was stripped of her guns and armor, reassigned to transport duty. For the next 2 years, All American carried troops and cargo across North Africa and Italy. Not glamorous, but essential. On January 19, 1945, she was damaged in a taxiing accident at Gioia del Colle airfield, Italy. Struck a parked C-47. By March 6, she was condemned to the salvage yard. On April 13, 1945, less than a month before the end of the war in Europe, B-17F serial number 41-24406 was officially stricken from the inventory. Scrapped. Melted down. Gone. But the story lives on. Ken Bragg survived the war. So did his entire crew. They went home, raised families, lived quiet lives. Sam Sarpolus, forever after known as Lonesome Sam, never forgot the day he rode the tail of a B-17 like a kite. Julius Meinberg, the German ace, survived his burns. He returned to combat in August 1943 and survived the war. Erich Paxier, the other German pilot, died that day. His body was recovered from the wreckage of his Messerschmitt. And the crew of Flaming Mame, 7 men killed in action, 3 captured, are remembered alongside All American's miracle. Because to tell one story is to tell the other. February 1st, 1943. A day when physics failed. When metal held together by sheer willpower. When 10 men looked death in the face and said, "Not today." The B-17 Flying Fortress earned its nickname that day. Not because it was invincible, but because, even when broken, it refused to fall. The Germans called it a devil machine. Maybe they were right. Or maybe it wasn't the machine at all. Maybe it was the men inside it. 10 men who came from all across America, who named their plane All American, who refused to give up, who brought each other home. That's the real story of the B-17 that kept flying with no tail. Not a story about metal and rivets. A story about courage and the unbreakable bond between brothers in the sky.
Next time, the bomber that landed itself, with its entire crew unconscious. The ghost flight of 1944.